Hi, and welcome to the art direction skill. In this video, we're going to cover what is art direction, how you do it, and give you a demo as always. Let's start breaking it down. So what is art direction? Actually, I want to start off by referencing an article that I read by a designer called Dan Mall, and he actually told a story to explain what art direction is. I think it's a great story, so let me share it with you. So he basically said something like this. Imagine you go home to your partner and you tell her, I love you, but you do it with kind of like an angry face. Well, that is kind of weird and confusing. Like, do you love me? Are you mad at me? What is going on? It's not really clear. Now, imagine that, you're just laying on the couch there watching TV and you're like, I love you. So that is also not really, in line with really showing her that you love her, right? It might also be confusing. It might even be, make you feel resentful. But then imagine that you actually go there with flowers, you get down on your knees, you look at her eyes and you tell her, honey, I love you. Then she really understands because all of your actions are actually in line with you trying to convey that feeling of loving her to her. So basically what Dan was saying was that when we try to art direct, we try to convey some kind of feelings, all the little elements like the smiling, like bringing the flowers, looking in the eyes, those are all the design details, the details that we design in order to convey the feeling. And trying to convey that feeling is actually the art direction. And we as designers, we need to pick out all the details in order to communicate and have our story coherent so that other people know what we mean when we're trying to convey something. So that was Dan Mall's story. I think it's a fantastic way to kind of like a metaphor to explain what art direction is. I also want to share kind of like my personal story of how I was introduced to this concept and was actually at my first kind of day at design school, and our teacher basically put us all in a circle and he started going through people's shoes and telling them, hey, why did you pick this shoe? Like what's behind this? What does this tell us about you? And a lot of people were trying to, put this off as in, those are just the shoes that I have. I just bought them because they were cheap or something like this. But the point that he was trying to convey is that when it comes to something like shoes, there are no defaults. Whether you consciously think about this or not, you are actually making a statement about who you are with the shoes that you choose, right? With their color, with their type, with their brand. Everything says something about you, and other people are going to read into that and they're going to learn something about you, whether you want them to or not. This is not up to you. And basically, introduce us to the concept that you cannot not communicate. Everything that you do, you're always communicating something. You cannot, just be blank and not blank and not communicate anything because you're always doing something. Even if you wouldn't wear any clothes at all, that would also tell a story, right? And, he mentioned David Carson. David Carson is a famous designer from the 90s who kind of introduced this concept of you cannot not communicate by doing designs that were very, very crazy in terms of they went a lot against all of the things that we talked about earlier in terms of legibility and making sure that the type is readable and it's clear. He said, look, I'm going to make my text not readable, but I don't care because that's the story. That's the message that I want to send you, that I can tell a story about aggressiveness, about grunginess, all of that stuff, and you can understand that message and vibe even if you can't easily, read what I'm putting in this magazine. He was a designer of magazines. So that is how I learned the concept of everything that you put on a page needs to be in line with basically the story. If you're not going to be conscious about this, you're still going to communicate unconsciously. So you might as well, if you want to be a good designer, be conscious about all of these choices. Now I want to give you some more example actually from the world of cinema, right? Because in cinema, there's actually a role of a person that's called art director, right? And take a look at this frame from Wes Anderson films, which always have amazing kind of like art direction. Look, everything in this frame was planned out. It's not there by accident, right? The fact that everything is yellow, the fact that everything is symmetrical, note from the bed to the fact that there are lamps in each side, like everything here, the lamps on each side, everything was thought out. And the person that his role is to make all of these different choices, that is the art director. The person that decided, oh, we actually need to have a Bloody Mary there because that adds to the story of this person and adds, another dimension here. So everything here comes together to tell this one particular story. Here's another, frame from a Wes Anderson film. Even here, note the choice of colors. There's nothing here by accident, from what they're wearing to how the packages in the background look like, even to the fact that the packages in the background are, in kind of a mess and they're not well organized. All of these different choices, nothing there is by mistake. Somebody had to plan this out, and this is the role of the art director. Last slide that I'll show you from Game of Thrones. Obviously here somebody had to think about what would clothes look like in this world, what would chairs look like, what would glasses look like, what would architecture look like, and that is the role of the art director. That's why when you have something like this, there was a very famous scene in Game of Thrones where somebody from the crew actually forgot a Starbucks cup inside of the, and you can see it in the, in the actual TV series, and it became viral. Why? Because having in this world that they have worked so hard to create, having something that stands out, that actually breaks the narrative, that is actually not part of the art direction, it's just weird. It just breaks the magic, and that's why people went crazy and it turned out to be viral. So that's basically kind of like a signal of what happens when you make a mistake in your art direction, when you leave something in that shouldn't be there. People immediately recognize that this is not part of this world. And this is our role. Our role is to make sure that everything that we put in, the project should be there. So how do we do this? Like, what does art direction look like in design? Let me give you an example, whether we design, websites or posters or brand or whatever. Here's an example. So here's a website for candles, right? This one feels, dark and premium-y. And we're going to take the same product, the same type with everything. We're just going to change the design choices from the packaging to the color to the type choices to how buttons look like. And it's going to look completely different, right? This tells a very different story. This is going to appeal to very different people. And so again, these are the same product with the same actual content, but the design choices are very, very different, and it's going to be appealing to very different audience and tells a completely different story. So this is actually where everything that we've covered in the fundamentals, all the different elements from type, color, imagery, layout, they are all coming together to tell this one coherent story. Remember, in each one of them, when we dissect how do you pick type, how do you pick color, we've mentioned that you want to be mindful of what story and what message you are conveying with this choice. Now here, the role of art direction is looking at all of these different elements from the top and being conscious about what are we trying to communicate and how to make sure that all of these choices work together. So how do we actually do this? Well, the tool for art direction is we do this by collecting different references. Now you have to remember that at the end of the day, we're not really inventing anything new. Even if we put things together in a new and original way, we always work with something that has already exist in the mind of the people that we design for. And so our tool is the mood board. Right? We collect references, we put this on a mood board. And let me show you some examples. So the first one that I want to show you, I actually want to show you here a project that I worked on and how we did the art direction for that. Okay, so this is the art direction of an illustration project that I was doing for a client. We had to direct and illustrate some kind of visual for the hero section of a website. And so there were a few components that we wanted to bring together. So first of all, what type of illustration, right? There's a lot of types of illustration, right? There's handmade, there's vector, there's all kinds. And in this case, we wanted to have an illustration that is kind of flat but with outlines, right? So we've brought this in as a reference. We've brought some other references that had kind of like outlines and then filled out vector shapes. So this is to explain, here is the type of illustration we want to bring. Now, what color palette? Well, we bring in some color reference to say, here, this is the type of colors we'd want to use in this illustration. And then what would the character look like? So here we had basically a secretary sitting in front of a computer. So we've decided that we want to go with something like this 50s, 60s secretary typecast, in that kind of feeling of a character. And here's another kind of reference for this secretary look. So the results of that was this illustration, but you can see how we've art directed all of the different components that goes into this illustration, from the illustration type to the color choices to the definition and characteristics of the actual character in this illustration. Here's another one from a 3D project that we worked on. This was for a client in the investment of cryptocurrencies. So we wanted to go with something that resembles coins, but in a very abstract way. We also wanted to go with kind of like blank shapes. So those were some of the references that we had, and this was the final result, which we've also animated. And here are some more examples of mood boards for typography. Obviously, in this case, it looks something premium. It looks like something very sophisticated, artistic, perhaps, literature based. Here's an example of a mood board for colors, and you can bring in colors just like you see here, either actual solid colors or just colors of imagery or different designs that you feel like convey the color. Here's a mood board for photography, and you can see that the common thread in all of these photographs in this case is kind of like the vintagey filter that they have on top of them, a little bit of scratch, a little bit of a graininess that kind of gives you the mood of what we would like photography to look like in this project. Here's a mood board for UI, right? So we can see here the use of abstract gradients, the use of very, very clean outlines and minimalistic UI. All of these things can be used as references for a mood board. So mood boards are actually helpful for us in two very different ways, but very, very helpful. The first one is it helps us to align expectations with the clients in terms of what we are about to build and design, and help them to imagine how things are going to look like. This is important because you don't want to surprise them. You want to be aligned that you're going in the right direction. So the first thing, it helps you to mitigate risk and align on expectations with your clients. The second thing is whether you're doing it for yourself and using it as a compass, or you're collaborating with a team of experts, just like I showed, 3D artists or an illustrator or whatnot. This helps to create basically the brief and the guidelines and set the expectation in terms of what you need for them to do. So one thing that is very, very important when you are creating mood boards, it's basically kind of like food, right? If you're going to take cheap processed food, you might not have the best food. If you take high quality, fresh ingredients, of high quality, you're gonna get good food. So you wanna make sure that the things that you're bringing in, the references that you work with, they're always top quality, right? You're gonna pick things from art. You're gonna bring things from history, from nature, from fashion, from architecture, from music, from culture. You can bring in inspirations and references from everywhere, but you want to make sure that you're looking at good things, right? It's best to, just like I've mentioned food, it's best to not bring in processed references. The cleaner you bring in things, the cleaner the reference is, the better and more unique the quality of the results will be. If you're going to look for references at image banks and Shutterstocks and stuff like that, you can be sure that everybody else is picking up references over there. You're going to probably go with something cliche and not very high quality, and the results are probably going to be the same. So you want to make sure you're working with high quality references. All right, let me show you a demo of how I go around creating a mood board, and then we'll wrap it up. So for this demo, I am going to create a mood board for a new boutique style hotel that needs a landing page. And the particular thing about this hotel is that they are proud of their Bauhaus architecture. In this case, this kind of gives us a very strong point to where to start our brainstorming session in terms of the art direction. So the first thing I would probably do is I would start actually reading a little bit about this, right? I can read about the Bauhaus, and this would actually it can send me into a lot of different places, right? It tells me already that a Bauhaus is something that influenced a lot of graphic design and interior design and typography and all of that, and also gives me kind of prominent artists that I can open up and I can see some visual things here. Now, of course, I don't have to specifically use these things, but a lot of these things perhaps can throw me into some kind of idea or references, or to see things that I like in terms of, oh, look at the colors, look at the type of shapes here, and I can make a decision whether this is appropriate for the project or not. One more thing that I can do is I can go on to Pinterest and search for Bauhaus, and here you can see a lot of interesting things. The problem with this, I think this is very useful, but I think this is where you can already see things that this is not the original, as I've said, this is processed. So in this case, here's how somebody already took the ideas of Bauhaus in terms of the colors and shape and applied them into interior design. Now, so this is, on one sense, it's interesting. This one as well. Note, this is somebody taking out already all of these ideas, right, of the grids and Mondrian and all of these concepts, and translate them into, animations or translating them into windows or something like this. So as I've mentioned, you probably want to make sure that you are staying as close as you are to originals when you're taking, because here we already have a lot of kind of like processed inspiration. But I'll tell you the truth, I'm working on this project and I see where most people go with this kind of like stuff. But I want to take this into more kind of like clean place. Actually, this is the type of, architecture. This is also based in Tel Aviv where I am. So we see a lot of these buildings, and let's say the hotel looks something like this. So I actually would love to use these basic geometric shapes that we have here with the curve, but actually like with a lot of white and blue in this kind of versus all of these. Here's more like things that I would love to take the project in, because I want it to be clean. I want it to be, so this is really nice. I can start taking out all of these images and start bringing them here together. And for me, this is not specifically inspiration for photography, but actually this is an inspiration for color palette. So perhaps I'll go with something with a lot of white and a little bit of blue, and the shapes, right? The curviness of these shapes. So perhaps I don't know if I need two of them. So I can start looking at this. So perhaps it threw me into geometric shapes. So let's geometric shapes. And this is kind of like a brainstorming session with yourself, where you go down the rabbit hole of saying, what do I think is going to be a good fit for this? So would these basic shapes work well in this kind of scenario that we have here? Let's bring it together and we'll see if we're getting something that is consistent. Perhaps I'll search for geometric typography. And let me see what I get when I'm looking for those things. So those things are cool, but to me they're not premium. And at the end of the day, we are looking at a premium hotel boutique hotel perhaps this can be developed into something that is a little bit more premium. So let me collect this for now, not this. All right. And see how I can develop these ideas. Let's see what else we have here. This is also something that perhaps is nice and is aligned with what we're looking for. So I'm going to collect this as well. So right now I'm just in the collection phase. Actually, looking at these two, I'd rather stay with this. This is not relevant. And let me look again for Bauhaus typography. Bauhaus, not sure I wrote this correctly. Bauhaus typography. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so this is geometric, but also very, very clean. We can see that, yeah, again, they're using a lot of geometric shapes here. But these things, oh, this I like. I don't know why, but immediately I like this kind of like layout with the shapes and the color coming on top of one another. I'm gonna collect it. I actually also like this outline of big numbers and shapes. So let's take these. Let's take this. Let's take this. So now, as we're just picking up stuff that we like, we'll see where we have colors coming from this one, typography perhaps from this one, shapes coming from this one, layout coming from this one, and we'll collect more and more until we have something that we can start using for. And now we'll combine all of these elements together. We can start seeing something new comes to life. Oh, this is also quite nice, this type. Yeah, this looks pretty premium-y, and I like this. Perhaps we'll do something with this. Let's also do, now I know that Bauhaus is, if I would read more into this, I would learn that it's, you know, influenced the Swiss typography, Swiss layout. Let's look for Swiss layout. It's usually very grid based. Let's see what we get here. Okay, so what do we have here? This is pretty cool. What else do we have here? Oh, this magazine is pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna collect these. Now perhaps this gives me an idea actually for a color scheme. You know, I wanted it to be mostly white and then with combination for blue. So perhaps something like this with this kind of treatment is actually nice and can perhaps be interesting throughout the website. Although I don't know if for a hotel duotone colors is a little bit too hardcore, but let's also look for a little bit of Bauhaus photography. Bauhaus photography. Excuse my type. All of my typos, Google will correct that for me. Let's see actually what Google's gonna give me. So we have all of these shapes, diagonal shapes. This is pretty cool in terms of layout. We have all of these repetitions. Pretty cool layout, both layout and kind of like composition with the image. Perhaps we can do something like this with the photography of the hotel. So I'm gonna copy this in terms of photography reference. And all right, I think you get the grasp of it. This is of course only a beginning. I'd probably spend a couple of hours trying to develop this and have more photography reference, color reference, and more, but this is how I would try to dive into the rabbit hole and grab as much as I can. All right, so to sum things up, you want to make sure that every project that you work on, you create a high quality mood board for. And that can be, you know, a mood board for the whole project, or you can dive even deeper and create a specific mood board for type and specific mood board for, you know, color or imagery. The second point is you want to make sure that all of these different elements, type, color, layout, they're all coming together to tell a coherent story.